Hey vinyl community, this is Tim back with the University of Vinyl and a new video today. I don't know if you looked at the pre-roll, but I was blown away by one of my recent videos that I put out. 10 easy to find albums with audiophile quality sound. And most of those records that I focused on were from the late 60s all the way up into the 70s. I did feature Beck's Sea Change, which was 2002. Today I'm going to switch it up a little bit, but first of all, thank you everybody for all of the comments. I counted up the comments before I hit record today, and something like 135 comments and feedback, which is fantastic. That's what we're looking for with a vinyl community, any kind of community online, is feedback and a general discourse. There were no nasty grams or anything. A couple people complained about me picking an album out with my fingers. But in the heat of the moment when you're filming, things happen. I will say that nothing was damaged in the creation of that video. Anyway, so back what was I talking about? Today we're gonna talk about 10 more albums that are still fairly easy to find out there in the wild that have incredibly good sound. And when I mean sound, I'm talking about your own system. These albums that I'm going to show were produced, mixed, mastered, so that they were ready for the mass market, and they wanted people to be blown away by the sound. Especially as we moved into the mid to late 80s with the advent of the CD, people really started, those who had a lot of pride in the vinyl product, they took extra care, all the way down to, in some cases, the actual vinyl compound that was being used for pressings. And we're going to talk about that as an example in the first record I'm going to show today. So this is 1984 Reckoning REM. It's their second album. It's on IRS Records, and this album sounds amazing. There's a particular copy or pressing, and there's a couple different variants of this pressing that sound the best. And that is something that was pressed on Quiex vinyl. Quiex vinyl was also known as virgin vinyl. And I did a whole video on Quiex vinyl about a month ago. You can find it in my catalog if you want to check that out. But I feature this album and a lot of others that were originally pressed on Quiex vinyl. The very cool thing about Quiex vinyl is you really didn't know that you had that, other than maybe there might be a hype sticker on the jacket. But more often than not, what you had to do to determine if it was Quiex vinyl, you had to hold that album up against a light or a window, and you would then find out that the album was actually translucent. But to the naked eye with no light, it looks like a typical black vinyl record. So Reckoning is actually on a very, very pretty purple translucent vinyl. But anyway, this album, if you can find it, there are two variants. There's that purplish hue that I have, this particular pressing, and then there's also a brown translucent Quiex vinyl. Short aside here, but the Classic Records audiophile label at Analog Productions, they typically used Quiex vinyl for all of their pressings in their entire catalog. So anyway, that is the first thing today. Reckoning, REM, 1984, one of my favorite REM albums. Second Guessing, Little America, Don't Go Back to Rockville. Great album. In addition to that Quiet vinyl for the Reckoning album, REM used an incredibly well-known, well-respected engineer at that point in time, who's actually still very active today, and it's someone by the name of Greg Calby, and he works at Sterling Sound in New York. So that album was actually mastered by Greg Calby at Sterling Sound. In the other day with the video, I mentioned that there's going to be some common threads, and there's going to be some names that will pop up multiple times for some of these albums that I'm going to show, and this is an example right here. So this is 1981, Hard Promises, Tom Petty. This was the famous, Tom Petty, after Steely Dan came out with Gaucho, they wanted to raise all the records $1 for their superstar artist. So I think the original price back in those days was $7.98 or maybe $8.98, and they told Tom Petty that when this thing came out, it was going to be in the new superstar category. His distributor was MCA Records, and it was now going to be $9.98. And Tom Petty, knowing him, you've heard about him and how great he was with his fans. He put up a stink, and the album was basically held up for quite some time. It didn't come out, it wasn't on the streets until I think May of 1981. And you can tell how dated, sometimes you can tell how dated that delay was, because in the dead wax of this album, they put in the very early pressings, etched, I Love You JL, or We Love You JL. JL standing for John Lennon, who was assassinated in 1980. Hard Promises was also mastered by Greg Calby at Sterling Sound in New York. So there's a common thread between that REM album and then this Tom Petty album. And this album, you put this on and it just comes cascading out of your sound system, okay? Of course, side one has got the Waiting with that introduction strumming acoustic guitar and slowly moving, kind of building. It's one of his great songs, and it just sounds amazing. Then you've got Insider, which is a duet with Stevie Nicks. Everything sounds great. Another one that I love, where is it? Night Watchman. So the guitar interplay on that, it bounces between left and right hand channels, and thing was mixed and mastered incredibly well. I'm also a little bit lucky. I do have a gold stamp promo, so promos are always sounding really nice as well. So the third album today is Hejira, Joni Mitchell. This was released in 1976. That was on the Asylum label, and most of Joni Mitchell's albums, they all sound incredible. Port and Spark, Blue, they all sound amazing, and this is no exception. This was mastered by Bernie Grundman. So Bernie Grundman, a world-famous engineer, he's actually been doing a ton of work here in the current vinyl revolution with all of these reissue labels and audiophile labels. So he's been kept very busy. But all the way back in 1976, he mastered this album. And, this is a gorgeous package by Joni Mitchell. She, the most famous song on here is Coyote, And that song was actually performed live during the last Waltz concert. You can see it in the film. Neil Young was up with her. But very much a jazz-inflected album. And she had Jaco Pastorius on bass on this album, Larry Carlton on guitar. Larry Carlton, famous for that guitar solo in Steely Dan's Josie. Unmistakable, great jazz-inflected guitar. And one cool thing I've noticed lately, there's this guy on YouTube, I'm sure a lot of you have seen him, Rick Beato. What makes this song sound great? Anyway, he did a little video episode on the second song on side 1, Amelia. If you have time, you might want to check it out. It's pretty cool. But that is Hejira, 1976, Joni Mitchell. Sounds great. So in my last video, I talked about the Bring the Family album by John Hyatt. And that was mastered in Los Angeles at a mastering house called Precision Lacquer. And Precision Lacquer at that time was known as one of the very, very best, one of the gold standards. And they had an engineer there by the name of Stephen Marcusson. He has since gone on to form his own mastering studio, and he's still very, very active today. But this album that I'm going to show right now was actually mastered by Stephen Marcusson at Precision Lacquer. And this is Solitude Standing. This is the 1987 album by Suzanne Vega. And this is just a gorgeous sounding album. Of course, it leads off with that kind of a cappella scat, Tom's Diner, and then moves into track 2, which is the one that everybody knows, Luca. And there are a lot of quiet passages in this album. She kind of reminds me a little bit of Ricky Lee Jones. And her voice also has a little bit sounds like later day Liz Phair. But she's a very good acoustic guitar player, also electric guitar. She had a young band with her on this album. This was kind of her breakthrough. And caught at Precision Lacquer in LA. Stephen Marcusson, sounds amazing. 1987. So we're going to continue on with 1981 Trouble, Lindsey Buckingham. Kind of an iconic photograph on that cover. This came out on the Asylum label. This was Buckingham's first solo album. I believe this came out just after Tusk, which Buckingham was largely responsible for. Very cool artwork in that gatefold package. So this was also mastered by Stephen Marcusson at Precision Lacquer. You put this album on, and of course the big standout hit was Trouble. Just kind of comes, the song kind of has a slow build and it comes cascading out of my speakers, and really good separation of instruments on this. You know, Lindsey Buckingham is one of those obsessive studio rats, a la Brian Wilson.
Basically trying to do is take a track that we cut in the studio, which has very, very dry sounds on it, no ambience, no echo at all, and selectively, say, take the snare drums and the vocals, run them through these speakers, mic the bathroom, which is right across the hall, which has an amazing sound. I mean, 1927 bathrooms, believe me. Rock and roll.
Right, one of his heroes actually. I think one of these songs is actually Brian Wilson's Sweet. Anyway, I digress. He actually was on Saturday Night Live when this album came out. Mick Fleetwood played drums on this album back when they got along. And anyway, there are rumors that there might be a thaw happening in the Fleetwood Mac camp. We'll see what happens, although they're all getting on. But anyway, this is just a gorgeous album. Buckingham is a studio wizard. He uses the studio as an instrument. You can hear that all over Tusk and a lot of other Fleetwood Mac albums where he was afforded the opportunity to either produce or co-produce. But anyway, this is just a great sounding record. Easy to find too. I mean, these are literally, every time I go to a record shop, every other time, let's say, this is in the bins, and you can get it for between $5 and $10 typically. This is 1989's New York by Lou Reed, and when this came out, I bought it on CD, and it was one of my favorite albums, and it still is. This is getting a little bit trickier to find on vinyl. I have stumbled on it a couple times in the wild. I actually went on Discogs and picked this up. But this album, again, came out in 1989. It's on Sire. He had Rob Wasserman on bass on this album. Rob Wasserman, great, dearly departed bass guy. The interesting thing about this album, and we're going to be moving into a couple or two or three more, this was mastered at a mastering house in New York City, Masterdisc. And the lead engineer at the time was Bob Ludwig. So he mastered this album. One of the awesome things that you'll see on the back cover of this album, Lou kind of wrote his own liner notes, and was it that there's a sentence here, you can't beat two guitars, bass, and drum. So I agree with you, Lou. Anyway, 1989's New York, really powerful album. You've got Dirty Boulevard on this, Halloween Parade, Endless Cycle, Last Great American Whale. This came out in 89, and remember, this was during the end of Reagan into the first George Bush years, and Lou was talking about all the poverty and problems in New York City and Manhattan. Anyway, you got to check out the lyrics. So I'm going to show another album that came out in 1981, and this is a Canadian band. This was a breakout album for them in America. It was the first time that they had worked with a 48-track system. Their producer was Terry Brown, and eventually that album was mastered at Masterdisc by Robert Ludwig, and some people probably have already guessed what I'm talking about. Of course, it's Moving Pictures, Rush, 1981, Red Barchetta, YYZ, Tom Sawyer, all those songs. There's not much I can say about it, but I will say the additional electronics and synthesizer, electronic bass that Geddy Lee had employed, it just sounds amazing. And the soundstage on this album is huge, okay, and wide. Highly recommended. So in 1982, there was a quirky English band that put out a double album called English Settlement. And that band, of course, is XTC. And this album like a lot of XTC's catalog, sounds great. This is the double album that was released in the US. It's on Geffen, and I have heard there's a video out there, Michael Fremer's best sounding albums. He cites this as one, although he has a UK press, which I'm jealous of. It has an embossed cover. This is not embossed, but this just sounds amazing. Andy Partridge and Colin Boulding, two incredible songwriters. There's that Geffen label. There are 15 songs on this album. I'm actually checking a couple of notes that I made here. A big part of this album was Andy Partridge, was getting tired of touring. He was burnt out. He was addicted to a couple different substances, some of the pill variety, and he wanted to kind of stop touring. And with this album, he told the guys in the band, let's spend some time in the studio and let's put together an album that really can't be replicated on stage. And I really do think that they succeeded with this. The different scopes of sound between all the different songs on this album is just incredible. And No Thugs in Our House, the bass on that is just unbelievable. And talk about a live sounding album. English Settlement, a landmark album. This was really the first album where they started to use the studio more, Partridge especially, and they would move on further, Oranges and Lemons, etc., and continue down that path. Great band, XTC. Here they are, one of those bands that people love to hate, but if you actually dig into some of the music, especially the earlier albums, you will really be rewarded. I'm talking about Hall & Oates. This is the Voices album, came out in 1980 on RCA. Definitely looking very 80s there, even though this is 1980, probably recorded in late 79. Guess what? Mastered at master disc by Bob Ludwig. And there, of course, was the huge hit, You Make My Dreams. And when you hear that song, first of all, it's kind of nostalgic, but you will suddenly realize the recording quality of this album and how good it sounds on your system. So that song sounds particularly great. However, I would point you to listen to Every Time You Go Away. That's a song that, what was his name? Anyway, he played it at Live Aid. British artist had a huge hit with it later on, 85, 86, Every Time You Go Away. But I actually prefer Hall & Oates' version. John Hall's got a great singing voice. Of course, these guys they hooked up originally in Philadelphia, and their idols were all the Philly soul bands, the Stylistics in Motown as well. But this album is really easy to find. Again, inexpensive, $7 or $8 typically. There you go. So I'm ready to show the last album for today. This is the 10th album, and remember, this video and my previous video, this is just focused on mass market produced albums that were done well. Okay, these were talented technicians, engineers, all the way down to, in some cases, the compound of vinyl that was used in the pressings, like we talked about with Reckoning and REM. They were easy to find. They are easy to find, relatively inexpensive. The one I'm going to show now is a little more pricey. It's a little more difficult to find in great condition, but they are out there. You just have to keep looking. And that is Fleetwood Mac's self-titled, otherwise known as the White Album, 1975. It was released. This came out on that Reprise label. There's the Steamship. This was produced by Keith Olsen. Now, Keith Olsen actually produced the Buckingham Nicks album. He's done work with a ton of artists. He passed away 5 or 6 years ago, I believe. But he knew how to work with an artist, a band, and get the most out of them. Very famous example, he worked with the Grateful Dead on Terrapin Station. And that album is actually another great example. Someone mentioned that in the comments from the last video. I'm still looking for it. I don't have that album right now. But anyway, Keith Olsen produced this album, and this was the first album with Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks on it after they joined. I think part of this was recorded at Sound City. Hard Promises, a Tom Petty album, was also recorded at Sound City, famous recording studio north of LA, up in the valley. There's a whole the Dave Grohl documentary, recommended viewing. If you haven't seen that, you should stream it. Really good documentary. And then this thing was mastered at another mastering house of the day in Burbank, California, known... My other camera's battery died, so here we are again. Anyway, I was just finishing up with this album, and it was mastered at a mastering house in Burbank, California called Kendon Recorders. Kendon Recorders was run by an engineer named Kent Duncan, so Ken Dunn. And he worked with a lot of different artists there, including Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa did a bunch of stuff there. So that is number 10, 1975, Fleetwood Mac, self-titled. Sounds amazing. I've got the textured cover, if you can see the texture on that. Really, really nice. That's it for this video. Thank you very much again for watching. If you're new to the channel or you just kind of stumbled upon me, really would appreciate it if you'd like to subscribe. I've got a lot more stuff coming up. I'm thinking about doing something with the XTC catalog. XTC is a favorite band of mine, and been doing a lot of listening to all of the albums. So that could be something coming up in the future. And in the meantime, I have other things up my sleeve, including a little shop visit in Denver coming up very soon. So thanks very much. Have a great day. Take care.